Welcome back to our channel. I want to thank you for watching. For those of you who have been watching our channel, we want to wish you a Merry Xmas and a prosperous New Year in advance. In this episode, as we always do on this channel, I want to focus on why the United States of America should stop complaining and go ahead and demonstrate what the US can offer the African continent. More importantly, I've put together two experts in this episode plus my own analysis, like I always do, to talk about the strategic engagement that Africa needs. The African people are tired of blame game that the US talk about China, and China is investing in Africa. The United States must show the African people the physical infrastructural engagement that is doing in the region. That's the reason why American diplomats that have worked in the continent of Africa are coming out clear to speak on this particular engagement, and I've looked at some specifics why China is beating the United States of America in the continent, and the US lack the visibility and also strong presence in terms of development and growth. Don't get me wrong, the US has also engaged Africa from a strategic point of view and some investment. However, the evidence is clear that China is everywhere, and that's the reason why this particular geopolitical engagement at the moment so far is in Chinese favor. Let's start this video by rolling out to listen to what an American former diplomat talk about this perspective, and we will lay that down with regards to our African expert, and I will take it on from there to give you more details with regards to this critical moment as Africa continue to make its own choices in this geopolitical circle. So I will join you on the other side, and I will encourage you to smash the like button, show your appreciation with regards to our work, and to make sure that we continue to bring you more informative content.
When talking about Chinese competition, the US really does not have the resources, or has certainly not provided the kind of resources that China has provided or is able to provide. For one, a lot of companies in a lot of countries in Africa are now receiving loans from Chinese state banks that are financing the infrastructure projects that go along with the Chinese state-owned companies. That's, of course, not the model that the US operates. And China sees Africa as an opportunity, and American businesses tend to see Africa as a problem.
In a way, I would say that politicians do not necessarily promote their association with China, but they let Chinese projects speak for itself. So there is hardly anywhere in Nigeria that you go to today that you don't see the visibility of China in terms of infrastructural projects, whether from the airport as you land at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, which is Nigeria's gateway to the rest of the world. The first thing you see when you get to that, when you land at that airport, is the presence of China there. And that brings into focus the visibility of Chinese projects.
However, investing in Africa is not just about competing with China and Russia. Africa is an epicenter of tremendous opportunity. If human capital is truly in the greatest asset to economic growth, Africa has unappreciated potential. In the next 35 years, Africa's population is expected to double and comprising nearly 30% of the world's population by 2050. By 2025, an additional 90 million African households will enter the consumer class, contributing purchasing power of over $2.1 trillion to the global economy. If you look at Africa's presence, Africa has also the potential to become the world's next manufacturing epicenter. As the cost of labor in the Chinese increases, experts project that 100 million labor-intensive jobs will leave country by 2030. With Africa as a likely landing spot, the Brookings Institute estimated that manufacturing spending in Africa will grow by over 50%, reaching more than $660 billion by 2030.
And so what has occurred in more recent years has been the new development that the Trump administration unveiled also in 2018 in part replacing the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, and merging it with some of the other arms of USAID and other elements to create what is now known as the United States International Development Finance Corporation. But it was only funded by Congress to the tune of $60 billion, and that's to provide loans and loan guarantees and insurance to companies willing to do business in developing countries. That's not specific to Africa, of course. So it's unclear exactly how much of that would even go to American businesses investing in Africa. And again, that's mostly loan guarantees. It's not the actual assistance to conduct the infrastructure. So this is one of the areas that partly makes us less influential. And if we're not willing to put in the money, and American companies are also unwilling to take the risks, we're going to consistently lose out to the countries like China that are looking at the long game, and they're forging relationships, both private and personal. They are making relationships and business deals with individual leaders in these different countries and the movers and shakers, but they're also developing a reliance on the model that they use by offering these loans that, as Vice President Pence actually called it, the debt trap diplomacy of China.
If you look at geopolitics as it continues to play, each competitor's strategy has its own flaws, and their uncertainty seems to be the United States of America to exploit. But contrast between Russia and China's involvement in Africa and Washington's neglect is stark. If you look at African rising at the moment, considering the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as it's at the moment its implementation phase, if you look at aspect, in 2021, 54 of the 55 African countries initiated the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I've pointed out. A free trade agreement that eliminates tariff on 90% of goods, enabling free flow of raw materials essential for manufacturing to thrive. If you look at Africa's emergence, there are also more immediate economic interests at play. Africa holds a vast repositories of three earth elements vital to the production of everything from cell phones, LED, screens, and also to energy infrastructure and defense technologies. More than 2/3 of the world's cobalt, an essentially ingredient in lithium battery, is in the Congo. Around 35% of the world's bauxite, a key component of the aluminium production, is found in Guinea. However, China currently holds a virtual monopoly on world's rare earth elements production, putting American economy and national security at risk. If the United States of America wants to secure access to raw materials required to build future, it's going to have to do that in the continent of Africa.
So they are highly visible. You see that they are constructing or remodeling projects from the airport to roads to hospitals to everywhere in the country. But here is the thing. So it's also a strategic move by Nigerian politicians by not openly associating with China. But that doesn't also mean that they are not in love with China. They may not openly associate with China, but they are in bed with China in several other aspects, which is partnering with them in terms of setting up businesses in Nigeria, whether it is free trade zones, as we see in the example of Lekki Free Trade Zone or the Ogungonjon Free Trade Zone, which are very interesting projects in two important states in Nigeria with proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. And these two projects are being sponsored by the state as well as the Chinese government and the various business interests in China.
A lot of the companies are owned by the Communist Party or entwined with the Communist Party and then financed by their own banks. So it's a complicated game, but we also have to think about what American companies are willing to risk. And China sees Africa as an opportunity, and American businesses tend to see Africa as a problem.
If you look at geopolitics at its play, politically, African nations were surprisingly significant, yet subtle influence on a host of global issues. At the United Nations, African countries comprise nearly 28% of member states, as I've pointed out, providing a powerful voting bloc comparable on channeling resources to initiated aligning to its interest. Unity amongst the A3, the three rotating African members of the United Nations Security Council, increases Africa's voice on the Council's resolutions, even ones that don't relate to Africa. What's more, the way in which African leaders choose to implement the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will determine which global powers have greatest access to the continent. Wide market worth more than $3.4 trillion if you look at figures. Earlier indications are that China is in the big winner if you look at Chinese interaction in the region. No doubt there are challenges to progress in Africa, but progress is being made, and truth is that Africa will play a central role in the next century, demographically, economically, and also politically, whether the United States likes it or not. If you are new to this channel, we will encourage you to subscribe, share our videos with your different network, and give us a like, and we will appreciate that.
I know as a former diplomat that we always wanted American companies to be involved in the countries that we were in, because we believe that we have a higher integrity, and we have rules about bribes, and people have to follow, corporations have to follow the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, whereas other companies around the world don't necessarily have to follow those things, and the Chinese are known for the kinds of practices, as well as making sure that they insist on hiring a good percentage of the workers to be Chinese. So, even the skills are not being transferred in many cases to the Africans. So if we really want to get in the game, even if we look at more recently at the Global Fragility Act, once again, the amount of money that has been allocated to the states that are ultimately determined to be fragile, it's, again, a fraction of the billions, the many hundreds of billions of dollars that China is investing in many of these countries.
As geopolitics shift and also changes with regards to U.S. presence in the region and the presence of China and also Russia with regards to the continent, Africa's choosing its own path. Today, Washington primarily views the continent of Africa as a problem to be managed rather than as a partner in shaping the new century. Promising economic and demographic trends have driven African energies and also emergence as a significant player on the world stage. But the United States has been slow to establish a clear, proactive policy for Africa. This is a strategic blind spot that most U.S. policymakers can't seem to shake, and one that their competitors don't have. If you look at the aspect, instead of a problem to be solved, China and Russia view Africa as an opportunity to be seized. And also from 2007 to 2017, the United States of America's trade with Africa dropped by 54% as China's grew by 220%. If you look at figures, while Russia's total investment in Africa pales in comparison to the United States of America and China, it grows also by 40% since 2015. China supports 46 port projects in Africa, financing more than half and operating 11. The United States of America supports 0. In 2006, China launched a Forum on African-China Cooperation, bringing together heads of state from across the continent every 3 years. Russia began a similar junket in 2019, holding the first Russian-African summit at the time in Sochi. The United States hosted something similar in 2014, despite the fact that we've seen other events taking place in the US most recently and Russia also most recently. The Biden administration has recognized Washington's error, but a diplomatic game in the United States is still playing from the behind. If you look at other aspects, in a savvy soft power move, China launched a 2015 initiative to put satellite television in 10,000 African villages. To surprise, the television set came from free, preloaded access to Chinese station, pumping state-sponsored content into homes across the continent. Today, Russia embed a formerly intelligence agent as a senior defense advisor in the Central African Republic, employs the Wagner groups in Libya and also elsewhere, and has deals with 7 African sub-Saharan countries to build their nuclear energy infrastructure with regards to strategic options in the region. We want to thank you for watching. We hopefully have informed you with regards to the geopolitics as it plays in the region. If you are new to our channel, we encourage you to subscribe, share our video with your different network, and give us a like. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
In a way, I would say that politicians do not necessarily promote their association with China, but they let Chinese projects speak for itself. So there is hardly anywhere in Nigeria that you go to today that you don't see the visibility of China in terms of infrastructural projects, whether from the airport as you land at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, which is Nigeria's gateway to the rest of the world. The first thing you see when you get to that, when you land at that airport, is the presence of China there. And that brings into focus the visibility of Chinese projects. So they are highly visible. You see that they are constructing or remodeling projects from the airport to roads, to hospitals, to everywhere in the country. But here is the thing. So it's also a strategic move by Nigerian politicians by not openly associating with China. But that doesn't also mean that they are not in love with China. They may not openly associate with China, but they are in bed with China in several other aspects, which is partnering with them in terms of setting up businesses in Nigeria, whether it is free trade zones, as we see in the example of Lekki Free Trade Zone or the Ogungonjong Free Trade Zone, which are very interesting projects in 2 important states in Nigeria with proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. And these 2 projects are being sponsored by the state as well as the Chinese government and various business interests in China.